Good morning and welcome to Fall Fridays here at the North Carolina Arboretum. My name is Carlton Burke. I'm one of the instructors for the Blue Ridge Naturalist Certification Program here at the Arboretum, where we teach all kind of interesting classes about the world of nature here in western North Carolina and the surrounding southern Appalachian Mountain region. And just to remind you, I've got a fall color tree ID class coming up next week on Zoom, so you might want to check out the Arboretum website for that, where we learn to identify trees not only by their fall color, but a lot of the fall characteristics such as their fruit, nuts, all those kinds of things. So check that out on the Arboretum website. But today, we're just going to take a leisurely stroll here along Bent Creek, the Bent Creek Trail that actually borders Bent Creek, and look for some fall color and everything else that we can find along the way. So follow me. It's a crisp fall morning here, and this is just what we need to get some of the colors to start to pop. So we're here in mid-October, and the colors are going to start turning a lot more. Now, we're not anywhere near peak at this point in time, but peak will probably come to these lower elevations in another week or two. But what we're starting to get now are some cold nights and warmer days, and that really gets the color change starting. So we're looking forward to a good color year here, and but you never know what the color year is going to be like. It's always different from year to year, but I can tell you one thing, it's always a wonderful color year somewhere here in western North Carolina. And the Arboretum is a great spot to go and explore it. You know, when we're thinking about fall color, most people think about the trees and the shrubs, but I also look for fall color in a lot of other areas. And right here by the entrance to the azalea repository, we've got some fall color that's not a tree, not a shrub, that I like to point out, and it's ferns. And a lot of people overlook the ferns, but how can you overlook a fern that stands 3 feet tall? So right here beyond the fence, we have a little patch of what's called cinnamon ferns. And cinnamon ferns are ferns that grow in damp locations in the forest. If you see them at higher elevations, they may actually grow in forested areas where they get more rainfall. But down here, the lower elevations are going to be near the streams, any little marshy areas where the soil is kind of damp and wet. And they turn this beautiful golden yellow color with a little tinge of green still in there, and they'll look that way until we have frost. And then once we have a little frost, if it's not too bad, they'll continue turning kind of a golden brown color. So I think that color, I just love the different layers of fall colors we have in the forest. We have the shrubs at the mid layer, going up high canopy, we have the tree leaves. Down at the very lowest part of the forest, we have the herbaceous plants, the ferns. So you find color wherever you can, and there's just so much color here in the Appalachian Mountains in view, and Arboretum is a good site here. We're next to Pisgah National Forest, and it's just a wonderful color show. So I hope you get out to enjoy it. Let's see what else we can find down the trail here. I see an interesting tree up here I'd like to stop and talk a little bit about. It involves a little fall color, but it also involves a little bit of something else that we don't normally see at this time of year. When we think about trees in bloom, we normally think about trees blooming in the spring or in the summer, but right here we have a tree, which some people might call a shrub because it's kind of low growing, but it can get up to small tree size. And this is our witch hazel. And if you look very closely at it, obviously you're going to see a little color change here in the leaves. It sometimes has some very bright golden yellow leaves on here, but it's not one of the major players in the color show. But what is interesting at this time of year, if you look very closely, there are little tiny little blooms. So this witch hazel actually blooms at this time of year in October and November. And I've actually seen sometimes we had early snows where witch hazel will be blooming with snow on the ground. But October and November is the time you'll normally see this. This is our native witch hazel. There are some ornamental varieties that are grown here at the Arboretum that will bloom in the springtime and have different color blooms. But this is our native witch hazel. And have you ever heard of the astringent witch hazel that some people buy at the drugstore? This is where it comes from. So this is a native plant. I love the way it grows, kind of twisting and turning, sometimes in a clump. It's always down near the streams, as we are next to Bent Creek here. And just one of my favorite wild shrubs, small trees, whatever you want to call it. Witch hazel in bloom right now here in mid-October. I love walking by the stream. I'm sure you can hear a little stream bubbling in the background there a little bit. It's always kind of a magical sound. Well, here's an interesting tree. Now, if you look over here by the stream here, now this one's not turning too many colors yet, but it's definitely on its way. And this is a little shrub, small tree, kind of like the witch hazel, but it's very different. And if you look at the bark, it's kind of got a cinnamony red bark that's a little bit shaggy. And it is a kind of a small tree. The biggest you'll see in about maybe 20 feet, 25 feet or so. But you can see the old blooms that are sticking out there, little bell-like blooms. And this is called clethra, or mountain pepper bush. And a very interesting plant that only grows in these wet locations. And in a good year, it turns a very golden yellow color. It's not one of these trees that turns red or something like that, like some of these others. It just kind of stays a golden color. And just one of my favorites with a reddish brown bark. Always down by the stream edges, not up on the ridges. So you have to look at these places to find the mountain pepper bush, also known as clethra. And of course, when we get into a little sunny opening here, I like to see these little sunny openings along the edge of the forest, because suddenly we see a lot of neat herbaceous things in the spring, fall of the year here. And we see some asters in bloom here. And asters provide their own little bits of color in the fall spectrum here. And asters come in a lot of different varieties. We have purple asters, we have white asters, and they're one of our typical fall flowers that are out there. A lot of people will overlook them because they're looking up high at the trees and miss the herbaceous layer down below. Of course, a lot of our other herbaceous plants are starting to die back, but they're still interesting to look at. And at this time of year, a lot of times the seeds and the seed pods, the fruits and things like that are exposed that you wouldn't see at another time. So you get to enjoy them from a different perspective. And here's an interesting tree, and notice this tree, we're talking about fall color day, but this one's still nice and green. But this is a tree we don't normally see in the forest at this elevation. This is a sugar maple. And a sugar maple is a very common tree that's planted a lot of times. In fact, if you want to see some beautiful fall color, go up to the Arboretum's parking lot, and you'll see some beautiful, right now, orange colored and yellow mix, flaming colors of the sugar maple, which is one of the best color shows out there in the tree world. But this one is down here deep in the forest, and it's still pretty much green. It's got a few leaves turning at the high part of it, but it's still pretty much green here. And sugar maple is a native tree, but it's found mostly at the high elevations here in the Appalachian Mountains. But it is widely planted as a landscape tree, and I'm imagining this one probably escaped from cultivation, maybe from one of the trees that's up there in a parking lot near the Arboretum, but it is still green. In fact, there's a lot of things that are still green down along the stream here, because we have a little bit of a different microhabitat here. And sometimes, you know, cold air can be dense and heavy, and it can actually pool in low-lying areas like this, and you might have an early frost in an area like this, but at other times it'll have a little bit of a temperature inversion, and the water down here actually never freezes because it's moving, actually provides a little heat zone. So this is a little bit of a thermal region. So sometimes around the streams, depending on how deep they are and how fast flowing they are, you'll have a little later color change depending on local conditions. So we'll probably have better color right now at some of the upslope surface between us, we're down here at Bent Creek and going up towards the parking lot areas. But definitely this maple here, sugar maple, has not changed very much, but its cousins up the hill are definitely at the peak of their color right now. Also, when I'm looking at fall things in the forest, I like some things that other people don't seem to like. And I'm going to make myself a little guinea pig here. This doesn't look like it's a beautiful fall color plant here, but this is an interesting plant here that has a seed strategy to distribute its seeds to different places. If you look very closely, you'll see some tiny little seeds, and they actually have little Velcro-like hairs on them. In fact, Velcro was invented by looking at certain plants and their seed pods. And you know, plants have all these different strategies for getting themselves from one place to another. So if you were to walk out in a sunny field or a wood's edge where you have this plant, which is called a beggar tick, and there's a lot of different species of this, if you brush up against this, these seeds will stick to you and they'll travel to another location where they'll fall off. So it can work on humans, but it also works on deer, raccoons, bears, other things. I'm going to just test it out. I'm going to brush up against this to see if I get any of these seeds on my pants or things here. Oh, yep, I got a few here. So I'm a human guinea pig here. So those things will stay on there and fall off somewhere else. They're seed hitchhikers, and I just think that's kind of a fascinating way to distribute your seeds. Use an unwitting passerby to do it. And I am that unwitting passerby right now. Here's an interesting little tree. It's got a little color on it. And we may have seen this before because it's always something that really stands out in the forest. But this is our native sassafras. And most of our sassafras trees in this area have a tendency to be small and shrub-like, even though some grow to tree proportions. But sassafras is noted for having different types of leaves. But if the bigger the sassafras is, the less different types of leaves it has. And as you get a little bit bigger, almost all the leaves will be this kind of an elliptical shape. But some, particularly when they're smaller, they'll have these 3 lobes. They'll have a mitten shape as well, and that's pretty standard. But if you see one that's much bigger than this, you'll see a lot more of the just elliptical leaf here, and that will throw you off and you think you found a brand new species of tree. And it's just that different trees at different heights and ages have different colored leaves and different shaped leaves sometimes. So it's just something to be aware of. And while we're looking at this might be a good time to talk a little bit about leaf color as well. You know, when the leaves start to change colors, we're seeing colors like the yellows that are coming through that have been there all along. And the way the color change happens in the world of nature is the green chlorophyll, which is the life-giving blood of the plant, which you see the green all spring and summer long, it just masks the other colors. But at this time of the year, with shortening days, less daylight, these trees sense what we call the photoperiod is getting to be less, and they're going to shut down the manufacture of food because it's just not worth it for them if you're a deciduous tree. So you quit making chlorophyll, it starts to fade away, and when it starts to fade away and drain out of the leaves, well, what you start to see is the colors of yellow, which are caused by keratin and xanthophyll, other pigments like that. They're there already, but they're being seen now because the green color, which was stronger and more obvious, was masking them. So now the things are turning yellow here, and that's why we have yellow leaves at this time of the year. The colors were always there, but we just didn't see them. So I think that's kind of an interesting fact. But then sometimes, as a tree we see down here, you'll see some reds. So we'll talk about what causes the reds in trees as well. So up on the bank here, we've got a little sprig coming down of a sourwood tree, which is always something that people are talking about when they come to enjoy the fall colors here in the mountains, because sourwood is such a common tree at a lot of different elevations. But notice it's turning red. If you look behind it, though, it's got some yellow in it. But sourwoods are one of those trees that turn red almost always, and sometimes they turn a deep crimson red. They're one of our stars of the color show here in the Appalachian Mountains, and definitely here at the Arboretum. But that red color is caused by some other color changes that are going on in the leaf. So we start with the green chlorophyll that's there during the growing season. It starts to drain out of the leaf as the days get shorter here and the tree or shrubs doesn't make the food anymore. The yellow colors caused by xanthophyll and keratin suddenly become dominant. But then as we go along, there's corky buildup in the petiole or the stem of the plant. And sometimes when those corky cells get in there and they block the flow of any of the pigment out of the leaves, then it traps certain tannins and sugars in there. And with the right conditions like cold nights and warm days, certain tree species like sourwood trees, red maple, sugar maples, sassafras, and many others will turn some shade of orange to red depending on how much of that stuff is trapped in the leaves. So if you wonder why some things turn red and some things stay yellow, that's why. It has a lot to do with environmental conditions around you, but it also has to do a little bit with the genetic makeup of a tree as well. But in certain years, you'll see certain trees that turn really, really bright red that normally just turn yellow. So a lot of it has to do with the local conditions, and that's one of the things I like about the season of trees in the fall of the year. It's always different. It's never exactly the same. And by the way, while we're here, I think it's kind of interesting. We've got a little habitat here of a rock face here. I can't ignore all the other things that are going on in the forest this time of year because you're stopping and taking a close look at leaves and plants and things. And notice on this rock face, we have some interesting little things going on. We have some little, looks like little organ pipes here and a little spider web, but those are the little clay structures caused by a mud dauber. And there's some mud daubers nests here, and a mud dauber is kind of a stinging type insect. It won't sting you, but it stings other things. And if you look at some of them to the right there, they've broken off, and you see little chambers in them, and those indicate the little sections that are in there. And what the mud dauber does, it lays its eggs in these little sections that chews up mud, makes literally clay with this that they actually form with their mouth parts there, these little tubes, and they lay their eggs there, and then they go out and they sting spiders primarily, and they sting them and paralyze them. Don't kill them, but they paralyze them and make them the living dead, basically. And they stuff them in those little chambers, and they're there as fresh food for the hatching little mud dauber larvae when they hatch out. So if you ever go up to one of these things and break open one and dig inside there, you'll find a whole lot of little baby small spiders. Some spiders are very small, some are larger, but they're all packed in there, and they're still living. They're just paralyzed, waiting to be eaten by the hatching of the little larvae that feed on them. We won't break those open or anything like that. We don't want to interfere with the cycle of nature, but isn't that interesting? So you find a lot of different discoveries out here on a autumn nature walk, other than just colorful leaves, if that wasn't enough. Well, we're walking underneath right now a black walnut tree, and I always like to point out black walnuts. This one is lucky that it still has most of its leaves on it right now, but a lot of black walnuts at this time of year, they actually will have leaves that fall off. They're one of the trees that lose their leaves sooner than just about any other tree, and they actually grow them out later than any other tree in the spring of the year. This one, however, has got still a lot of leaves on it. And but we'll see others along here that have lost most of their leaves. And black walnuts are usually not one of the best color participants in the color show in the autumn months, but sometimes they are, and it depends on the year. And when they are, they'll have some leaves that turn really bright yellow, but they normally don't hang on to the tree very long. They disappear very quickly, but they definitely will add their little bit of color. And one of the neat things about them, of course, are the fruits that they have, the black walnuts that look like green tennis balls that hang on a tree. And this one's down here in the forest. It's got a lot of shade and competition, so it doesn't have as many on it. But if you see one that's growing out in an open area, they have a lot of these little tennis ball walnuts, and a major source of food for a lot of the wild animals, including squirrels. Morning. And one of the fall colors that we haven't mentioned yet, we're seeing a lot of today, and they're in the sub-story of the forest, particularly in wet locations or damp soil, and they're a major player in the color show, is the spice bush. A lot of people overlook them, but the spice bush is a small shrub. Sometimes it's a single stem, sometimes it's multiple stems, as many shrubs are, but they have some beautiful yellow leaves that hang down on them. And if you go up to a spice bush before the leaves turn yellow and you break a leaf and sniff it, it smells this beautiful lemony scent, and it's just one of my favorite shrubs to kind of brush against and break a leaf off and take a whiff of that beautiful smell they have. Also, as they're losing their leaves right now, if you look very closely, you might see some tiny little bulbous little projections on the ends of some of the twigs there. Those are the spring flowers that are in a little bud. So in the springtime, this is also one of our first shrubs that blooms in the spring. And when you have enough of the sweet shrub, enough of the spice bush, the sweet shrub is another plant that's growing nearby here, but the spice bush, it almost looks like a little mist of yellow blooms wherever you see it, because spice bush normally seeds itself very well, and you'll find a lot of spice bush around the area. And definitely bring some color to the lower sections of the forest here when you're out looking at fall color. Another fall color tree we'll point out here is the black gum. And the black gum, this is not the best example, but you take what you get. But the black gum is kind of like the sourwood. It's one of the stars of the fall color show. And even as early as August, sometimes the sourwoods and the black gum trees, which look a little bit similar to each other to some people, will begin turning these different shades of yellow and actually going to red. And one of the things I like about black gum, and particularly sourwood, is once they change their colors to the reddish color, they don't just immediately fall off. They stay there for a while. So they have a very extended long color season, whereas some of our other trees, they drop their leaves very quickly and they're gone, and it ends up from one day to another being a totally different. But you can always count on the black gums and the sourwoods in a lot of areas. Well, I think that's about all the time we have today for our walk here along Bent Creek. So I hope you have enjoyed Fall Fridays here in October here at North Carolina Arboretum. Tune in every Friday for some more adventures with other people, looking at some of the fall colors here. And most of all, get out yourself, and wherever you can, whether it's at Arboretum in your yard or wherever you're at, get out and enjoy this beautiful fall weather and fall color that we're lucky enough to have here in Western North Carolina. My name is Carlton Burke, and I hope you enjoyed our little nature walk today.